Welcome to today's podcast interview. I brought on Jonathan Cohen. Jonathan, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
It's exciting to have another podcaster on. But for those who are new to you, please give a little background. Where do you live and what do you do?
Of course. So, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and I live in the great New York City. I've been there for almost 6 years now, living there with my beautiful wife, Maya. And I practice as an attorney for a private company that manufactures and distributes what we call consumer and professional grade electronics at a company called PMY Technologies. And I work as the associate general counsel, and I get to work in all these different areas, ranging from sales, HR, security, a whole bunch of different responsibilities. And as you mentioned, I also host a podcast inside the Inspired featuring high performing individuals like yourself.
Yeah. And what I want to talk about today, we've had, a pre-call, but really I love, and it seems that you're as passionate about having a growth mindset, that we are here to do great big things. And it seems that you definitely teach yourself mentally and physically by doing endurance activities. So I'd love for you to share more about why you do these different endurance things and why you're so passionate about contributing to others.
Well, it's a very dense question and one that I'm going to do my best to answer.
Yeah.
And like you, also have a bit of an endurance background we were talking about before the show. Have me beat with two of the 48-mile runs. But effectively, what I've done over time is I've leveraged what I like to refer to as general physical preparedness. It's this concept that stay ready, never have to get ready. And if you stay in a top level of physical condition, you're ready to tackle everything else in your life. So what I've done is I've channeled different experiences that I've wanted to perform that really super scare me. And so I tried to think of numbers that were astronomical, but still objectively impressive to myself that I would do anyway. And over time, I had exposure to content out there and mentors out there that gave me enough confidence in myself to be able to pursue something unique. So I crafted different philanthropic endeavors over the course of different years. And each year I pick something super tough to go out there and try to accomplish. And I make sure it's within the bounds of my skill set in the sense of my performance. But in terms of the feat itself, I make sure it's just outside the bounds of my skill set. So a couple of years ago, this all started with something I'm pretty good at, push-ups. And through my time in the Israeli military, they had us doing a bunch of push-ups, a lot of running, stuff like that. And I took that experience, I took that mindset, and I was like, how can I do something really good with this? And it was during COVID. So I created an Instagram live fundraiser, which in sum and substance, I did over 1,018 push-ups in under an hour, which raised enough money to feed over 20,000 people through Feeding America. And the feedback from that just created a springboard for me to go on and do a couple more different endurance feats where, like you, I did the 4x4x48 one time. And I added a spin to it where I added an additional 2 miles to represent the notion of pushing beyond the boundaries of what we believe is possible. And so it became a 50-mile run in 48 hours. And that raised over $15,000 towards an organization called Cure Alls, which effectively performs research in an effort to cure Alzheimer's. And that message resonated with a lot of different people because apparently a lot of people have relatives that suffer from some form of dementia or Alzheimer's. So physical activity through research is shown, and I could point to the studies for anyone who has any inquiries and wants to challenge me on it, that physical fitness is a pillar in what creates for effective cognition and maintaining like a level head. So that feat, that endeavor afterwards, I was like, I don't really know how I'm going to top this, but, I really love doing pull-ups, but, maybe I'll do like 500. So one day my father-in-law told me about his trainer who was aiming to do like 2000 in like 12 hours or something. So my 500 sounded like it was absolutely nothing. And the competitive drive in me was like, okay, I need to do something a bit scarier. I've been running from the 1,000 number, like, but I think I could do it. So I end up training to do 1,018 pull-ups for an organization called the Friendship Circle. And long story short, with that, a couple months ago, I ended up doing it in about 4 hours, raised over $20,000 towards this organization that serves children who have special needs. And the experience was really spectacular. The awards have been, coming in, the articles have been coming in, and really it was just something that scared the living daylights out of me that I felt was something I could give a little bit of, goodwill back to the world that's given me so much. And I think that answers the question. I hope I covered it.
Well, and here's what I love about your background. And I realize not everybody's an endurance athlete, but we all have things we can do to push beyond our comfort zone, our known, because what I shared with you is most people are living far below their means, settling for mediocrity. And, a couple things I wrote down is, like you said, you 500, but we are far more capable than we believe ourselves to be. So I'll share my background and I'd love to hear your perspective. But the reason I ran a marathon and then I did a triathlon and then I did a longer distance try and the 4x4x48, like I constantly do these physical challenges. Number one, it gives me focus. I feel like it keeps me in line, and by doing the physical feats, I remember training for my marathon, which 26.2 miles is far for anyone, but I
Yeah.
remember training for it, and literally every training run my mantras were, I am strong, I am capable, I am a finisher. And by using these mantras, we talk ourselves into greatness instead of out of it. So for me, the way I build my quote mindset muscle is physical feats. You as well. But let's talk about other ways that maybe non-endurance athlete people can
Sure.
do things to push outside their comfort zone.
Sure. I mean, in terms of experiences that have put me in a position to do any of these things, it all starts with the military. And also, even I'll back up even more, growing up in a household where high morality is something that I grew up with as a foundation of everything that I am. And I know it sounds self righteous, but the word integrity carries a lot of weight where I come from. And what it started out as was, live with morals. What it's developed to over time, as I've learned more words, taken the bar and read a whole bunch of books, is that I now understand integrity to mean to be one within yourself, to be whole, to operate from one code, one ethos.
Mm.
So different intense experiences have put me in a position to help me realize what I'm fully capable of and realizing that there is no cap. But in order to live by that, you have to, in my view, on a daily basis, do things that make you uncomfortable. So this way it reminds you of the fact that, nothing is given to you. And when it is, it comes at some form of a cost. And sometimes that cost could be your comfort. But for me, I have to, on a daily basis, whether that's living in New York or being at a random hotel when I'm on the road traveling and I'm staying by the airport and the gym equipment isn't great, like I got to make do with what I have. Sometimes that means I won't be able to lift the heaviest weight in the gym and I'll have to do something like an uncomfortable amount of calisthenics or, you know, we're talking about outside of the physical aspect. Well, for me, the hardest thing that I have to do is not touch my phone, right? So for the first 30 to 60 minutes of the day, I refuse to touch my phone because I'm not going to enter the world in a state where the world gets to dictate to me how to behave. And so I try not to be reactive to anything. So we hear a lot like get morning sunlight. Some of us don't have access to that. So I know it sounds cliche, but for me, this has really worked over the last few years. Either I write down, it started out as I write down three things I'm grateful for, and it can't be the same three things any 1, 2, 3 days in a row. And so over the course of 30 days, I would do that. And now it's turned into every single day as a reflex. I'm automatically thinking of something I'm grateful for. Sometimes just to keep the habit, it's the same things as the day before. But most of the time, I'm trying to force myself to think of something a bit different. And then I make sure that I read. I read something either, you know, like a book by Ryan Holiday or uh, something from history, something that really allows me to take in some new information. But again, it's just kind of buying time until I don't look at my phone. Because if I look at my phone, other people are dictating how I spend my time. But that like consistency allows me to take in new information, have that gratitude, and obviously, a movement practice of some sort where they say people store a lot of stress in the hips. So I try to mobilize my hips every single day for like 2, 3 minutes. So that daily kind of practice really helps me. So I'm big on intense experiences, which, we could get into some of the intense experiences that I've had. But you kind of got to curate them for yourself because I'm big on this notion of you have to give the gift of experience to yourself because no one's going to give it to you. So you have to go out and seek those things. And most of the time it comes in the form of physical fitness, but other times it can come in the form of volunteering. It can come in the form of a philanthropic endeavor, or it can come in the form of public service. So we can get into those things, but hopefully that also answers the question.
Well, what I want to highlight there, and that's why I interview people because I want to know other people's lifestyles and daily rituals because there's not one way to do these things. But what I hear from you is you're intentional with your time. You're intentional with your mornings. You're intentional with the mind body connection because there's a lot of focus on the body, but I don't think people realize and understand how powerful the mind is. And so, something you brought up before the call, which I want to highlight and I want to talk about. You said you have to have the courage to start and character to finish. Let's talk
Yes.
about that. What does that mean?
For me, I'm big on self-awareness. And so yes, the physicality of it, I'll probably refer back to a few times just because that is a great objective metric that we can all pursue. When it comes to financial or mindset or any of the other, it's a bit more abstract. So it's tougher for people to measure if they're actually progressing. So for me, when I hear or when I say it takes courage to start, if you look at any venture, and I can only really point to my own life as an example. I entered the Israeli military 3 days after I graduated high school. I ended up deferring college for a year. That 1 year turned to two, and I served as an infantry combat soldier in the military. But going into it, I didn't know what it would mean to actually serve. The whole notion was really cool in my head. I was a fan of superheroes when I was younger, but I didn't really understand and fully comprehend what it would take to put in 2 years of service. And so halfway through, I'm questioning this decision. And I realize, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Like I volunteered and that's cool. And I get a lot of acknowledgement for that. But it takes a different person that goes through that process than the one who entered it. You evolve. And so that person that I evolved into, I realized needed to develop a character, needed to develop an essence, needed to develop, like I said, a code, an ethos, integrity that he could align with in order to finish whatever he was seeking to pursue. So initially, I had volunteered for 14 months. I extended it because I developed that character through the military and understanding how to manage my time, how to manage my mind, how to not let my feelings dictate my behaviors. And so that became the foundation for a lot of things that I've gone on to do since.
Okay, what you just shared there is not allowing your feelings to dictate decisions. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
So I especially coach people a lot about learning how to respond rather than react. Because when we're in a constant state of reaction, that's how we get triggered, knee-jerk responses, say things we don't mean, and we let our emotions fuel us, which causes a lot of chaos. So can you offer any tips or tricks on how to live more in a proactive state of being instead of a reactive state?
Well, I could share what works for me. And the reason that I phrase it through that lens is because I always try not to come across as, you know, preachy in any one way, shape, or form. And I do believe that what works for me may work for someone else, but they could also take it, synthesize it, and do something else with it that may work for them. So the main thing I would say is find what's going to work for you and realize that's going to take experimentation. And the first time someone said that to me, it was frustrating because it wasn't clear. So how I've gone about what works for me is feeling like, okay, someone says something to me. I start to ask myself questions, and the analysis gets quicker over time. How does it make me feel? What do I want to say back? Do I fully understand what this person says? I tend to overanalyze things, but the first thing that I recognize is there's a power in standing still. So you
Pause.
don't have to just say things for the sake of saying things. Sometimes not responding is a response. So recognize that just because someone's talking and talking a lot, it doesn't mean they actually have something to say. In fact, most of the time, anything negative they have to say is some form of a projection. So having that high level of empathy is also super important. So recognizing those fundamental aspects of human behavior also stems from I developed a reading habit over time that I really focused on understanding human behavior. So I read a lot of books, like a lot of books. Like there's a whole bunch of books in back of me, and like
Yeah.
I read 3 times as much as many books are in back of me,
Yeah.
and ranging from a whole bunch of different topics, from yes, mindset, yes, philosophy, but also physiologically, what is the overlap? And so I went through this intense experience while I was working at the DA's office in the Bronx as a special victims criminal prosecutor. And in real time, I was also tracking my data with what's called a whoop. I'm sure you're familiar with it, but for the audience who may or may not use it, okay. So effectively, it's a tool that's non-invasive and it doesn't have a screen on it, and it tracks different metrics within your body, like, you know, your sleep, like your heart rate variability, like everything except your steps. And so with this data, I started to understand more, and I read a phenomenal book called The Body Keeps the Score that helped me understand what some of these metrics were. So the Whoop is advertised as this product that helps you rest, recover, and promotes that perspective. All right. Making sure that you can get all the rest you need. It's not the hour that you spend in the gym, but the 23 hours after that. And so it has this metric of heart rate variability associated with it. That's effectively the core element of its algorithm that gives you a score. So what's interesting is that in this book, The Body Keeps the Score, it also references heart rate variability, except it references it from the perspective of victims of trauma. And so now I'm understanding this particular metric from the perspective of, you know, how victims of trauma have a lower heart rate variability, and how athletes have a higher heart rate variability. So I've looked at it from two different sides of the spectrum, and now I've drawn this association between, okay, it's not just that heart rate variability is tracked and understood within athletes, but it's also an effective metric to help victims of trauma understand their own bodies. And why physical fitness is so important is because it forces you to be present, which stems also from that philosophical perspective. So before I get lost on a tangent, effectively, I'm going to relate this all back where I really took the time to understand myself, but also understand the human mind and the human body and understand that they work together. So that is a very, very powerful tactic and strategy that I would suggest to people, that when you go on this journey of figuring out how to develop immense and radical self-awareness, you got to read a lot, knowing what to read, what content to consume, auditing your diet in that way. I'm very, very big on my inputs because that helps dictate my outputs.
All right. So I have to come at another angle because, again, that's very 3D, matter to matter, mind, body. When you really get down the path and understand like the importance of kind of what you touched on, our emotions. And when we don't process emotions, when we suppress them, and men, especially men, are taught at a young age to suppress, big boys don't cry, etc. When men suppress those emotions, that's what creates dis-ease, disharmony, in the body, pain, etc., chronic pain. So anyway, what I ultimately love about you sharing all of that is you're right. It comes down to self-awareness, going within, being intentional with our time. And so I'd love to hear from you. What are some of your daily rituals or non-negotiables where you're currently at?
Yeah, of course. The big one is no phone. I commute 2 hours a day. So I really try to limit the amount of time that I spend on my phone because it's a very like annoying tool that I try to leverage for all these positive units of time. But at the same, token, it's like it can be a super big detriment to my productivity. So it's forced me to really focus on what matters to me. So my daily rituals effectively stem from that. Don't check my phone for first 30 minutes. Have that morning gratitude. I think of those three things that I'm grateful for. Try to not make them the same. I also pray, you know, for at least 2 minutes. Just again, going back to that gratitude portion, there's got to be some form of God in your life, at least in my view. That's for me. And a movement practice where I train first thing in the morning. Um, if I don't, my mind just is thinking about it all day. So I get it out of the way. Sometimes that's 5 minutes, sometimes it's 75 minutes. But first thing in the morning, I always try to get it done. And if that means, before a 6 a.m. flight, I got to wake up at 4, bang out like pull ups and push ups, then that's what I'm doing. Getting dressed, going to work, making sure I have some type of positive input as well. Whether that's a podcast, uh, depending on what I'm listening to, or if it's just silence. I really do my best now when I run or when I train, not to train with music because I'm big on presence. So my daily rituals, they focus on limiting distractions. So I try to have like a theme around being super present in every single thing that I do, like radical presence. And I get called out by the people that are closest to me in my life if I'm on my phone, like, oh, Mr. like big on presence isn't present. It's like, yeah, like I gotta live from the spirit and by the code that I've tried to establish for myself. But uh this these routines and these practices, I try to segment them into certain periods of time. In the military, I used to say that there was, each day was effectively 3 days, morning, afternoon, and night. And when I took those 3 days and I compacted them into 2 years worth of experience, that's a lot of days because you're not sleeping, you're eating out of cans, and when you are sleeping, you're sleeping on the floor or in a tent. Like I slept in a tent for 2 years, like in the desert. Like like it takes a toll on you, but it also calluses you. So all of these routines, they can change over time. So maybe over the last 18 months, this has
Yeah.
been my routine.
Yeah.
But we're in a time where routines are preached as if like this is the answer. Some people check their phone first thing in the morning, they hit the ground running and they count themselves working, from the second they wake up. That works for them. That does not work for me. I had a lot of learning issues growing up and I never liked to read, and I was pretty much the polar opposite of the type of person I am today.
Mm.
So over time I found that if I can eliminate the distractions and do things that are geared towards immense radical presence, I'm actually extremely productive and effective. So if I am distracted by my phone, by a thought, I'm like, all right, I'm not where my feet are. Like that's my grounding to make sure I'm like, all right, how do I get back to this conversation? How do I answer this question most effectively? How can I like do the best possible job that I can without compromising the integrity of what I'm trying to do?
I think if anyone took away two things from that, what I got was to eliminate distractions and create presence in your life. And I just want to highlight that those two things alone can make a huge impact in your life. Those two things. A lot of people I think change is hard. But I want to share a message that change is simple. It's not necessarily easy at first, but change is simple. Changing your thoughts, changing your habits. It is pretty simple. Something else I want to touch on before we kind of wrap up that you shared with me is the idea of leveling up. and that you are training for life. What does that mean to you to level up?
So going back to what you were just saying about change, there's this awesome quote by Viktor Frankl that he talks about in his book, A Man's Search for Meaning, is that change gets you closer to who you're supposed to be. So how that levels me up is that I recognize in order to level up, I got to do things that I don't want to do. And so I recognize that if I curate that into my day, if I program things I don't want to do into my day, then the rest of the day is that much lighter. So reading a book I don't want to read, look, I'm at the point now where I've read enough that I've developed a habit. So outside of my physical activity, I realize that in order for me to like make sense of any bad habit that I have, like why do I crave sugar? Why do I want to look at my phone? Well, it's dopamine hit. So I got to spend some time studying dopamine, even though I really don't want to. I'd much rather chill. Like I'd much rather do almost anything else. But if I'm going to level up and if I can understand the physiological, psychological, spiritual element of the way that my mind, body, soul operate, then I can channel myself in a methodical, strategic way to level up. So that channels the over analytical aspect of my mind where it's like, okay, why am I overthinking this whole thing? Well, in order to level up, you have to take on intense experiences. I referenced that before. So I alluded to the fact that I was a criminal prosecutor for 3 years. I could have gone and get a six-figure job in big law, but instead I opted for the public service opportunity where I knew that if I could be in the Bronx in court talking about really intense cases with extremely egregious conduct over an extended period of time, I gain immense relativity and perspective. I would be much more comfortable in my own skin speaking about things that I'm comfortable and uncomfortable about. And I would also be able to give back, obviously giving being at the root of all that. But those three pillars really helped me in terms of leveling up in the rest of my life. So I alluded to it earlier when I talked about giving the gift of experience to yourself. You asked me about, how to do that in a realm outside of the physical activity space. That's what I've done. I've done things I really don't want to do, but know I need to do in order to be the person I hope to be. And that's my strategy in terms of actually pursuit of all this.
Yeah, I love that. We've touched on several different things. So here's what I want to ask you. What do you believe is a key takeaway for listeners to get from today's conversation?
Be present, be grateful. Those are two main things. I would say, I'm big on purpose, a purpose-driven life. Figure out what that is for you. But in order to figure out what your purpose is, you got to think about what matters to you. And you can't think about what matters to you if you're not thankful for what you have and if you're not present in those moments.
Great. I love that. I'd love to wrap up the interview, so I have a few rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
What is a quote or motto that you live by?
It takes courage to start and character to finish, but also stay ready, never have to get ready.
And I don't know that I've heard either of those before today, but I wrote both of those down, so I love those.
Awesome.
What is a book you're currently reading or highly recommend?
Right now, I'm currently reading Discipline is Destiny by Ryan Holiday. I highly recommend The Body Keeps the Score. It's a phenomenal book. I also highly recommend A Man's Search for Meaning. I think that those few books are very, very powerful. And Obstacle is the Way. More than one, sorry. Can't help it.
Final question. What advice would you give your younger self?
It's funny. Usually on my podcast, I ask that question. But I think it's more the future self, actually. The advice I would give my younger self. You would think I was ready for this one after everything I said. I would say you are everything that you wish you'd be already. So stay grateful, focus on what's ahead, keep doing what you're doing because you'll get to where you want to be.
I love that, and such a great note to end on. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.